So I'm going to give you a brief agronomy update. I cut back on my presentation time to allow more time for our guest speakers. And so I'll do my best to get through quite a bit of information. I was pleased that Dave talked a little bit about saline soil tolerance of sunflower because that's one of the subjects I was going to cover. And so we'll talk about that as well. Oh, there was some mention about our sunflower field survey. This was a quick look at the number of fields that were covered last fall as we went through the survey and the states that were involved. So notice North Dakota had the largest number of fields, followed by South Dakota and then Minnesota. So the tri-state area was quite involved with the survey. So I'm going to show you glimpses of some of the agronomic things that we discovered in the survey to help reinforce our recommendations. I included one picture of one of the group of agents that I work with. You notice all those smiling faces. It was work, but we enjoyed it as well, and pleased to have the data and have the project supported by the Sunflower Association. So this is a quick at just the overall yield by states and then overall yield across states. Notice in most cases, from our last survey that was taken in 2021, that our yields did go up last season, which is good. Notice in North Dakota, we had a nice increase as well as South Dakota. I'm not sure what happened in Minnesota. Maybe someone can explain that. But anyway, 2023 was a good year for yield, and it was shown in our yield estimates, our calculated yield estimates during the survey. Well, I'm sure you're aware that we do have a NDSU Sunflower Production Guide. I noticed it was in the Sunflower Association's electronic newsletter yesterday. So if you do not have one and are interested in sunflower, which you have to be if you're on our program today, they are available. You can get them from NDSU Extension, or you can get them directly from the National Sunflower Association as well. All right, so my subjects, I'm got two basic categories. Talk a little bit about soils, and then I'll talk a bit about some selected areas within plant establishment. Go back to the survey from last year. Notice that across all of the states, no-till was the predominant tillage system. And the same is true essentially across most of the other states, including North Dakota and certainly South Dakota. So that's good because a lot of times our sunflowers are placed in soils that are less productive, maybe have less organic matter, more susceptible to erosion. And so no-till certainly dominates the tillage system for our Dakotas for sure. Just to support that of conservation tillage be important in sunflower production. This is some work from Carrington. We have a long-term crop persistence study where we compare primarily conventional till to no-till. Notice the 12-year average that no-till does not hurt us on yield. We can maintain yields with no-till compared to conventional tillage. And then looking at a couple other conservation till systems, direct seeding or strip till, and this was fall strip till, an average of 4 years. Again, we did not have a negative impact on yield with these tillage systems compared to conventional till. In fact, if anything, there is at least a trend for strip till to even possibly improve yield. And of course, Dave just talked a little bit about saline soils based on the question from Anita. And so we do have this very nice publication that if you're dealing at all with saline soils, take a look at it. This good information explains why saline soils occur, and more importantly, what to do about them management-wise. And so really the main management strategy to start managing these soils would be to take soil samples and sample those areas for electrical conductivity. Once we have those numbers, then we can put the information to use. This is our current table that we have for most of our cash crops in North Dakota. It includes sunflower. And notice that the EC levels are quite low for sunflower, actually in the category very similar to field pea, to dry bean, soybean. And looking on with a yield reduction due to saline soils, notice that we only get to 1 and already we're at 10% potential yield reduction with sunflower. And then 20% reduction when we get up to 2. We do know that after the sunflower is established, if it can get established, well, then the tolerance does seem to go up, but still not especially tolerant as compared to some grass crops like Dave mentioned, the oats or barley. So that's why the soil test is so important. If you have areas you suspect of saline, take that soil test, find out what the numbers are, and then you can manage accordingly. Well, let's talk about some other things on establishment in sunflower. And this is results of our survey from 2021. I wasn't able to pull the data for this past season's survey, but I suspect the numbers are quite similar. Fortunately, most people will follow a small grain with sunflower, and that certainly makes sense agronomically. The next most common crop that sunflower would follow would be corn, and that makes some sense as well. With corn, we usually provide a fair amount of plant nutrition, and maybe there's some leftover plant nutrition because of the long, deep taproot of corn or of sunflower that can take advantage of maybe some leftover nutrients, maybe even some leftover soil moisture. Maybe there's some further down the soil profile that the corn was not able to access that the sunflower may. And certainly with corn, we have a lot of herbicides available. We usually can keep our fields relatively clean. And if we start with a cleaner field with sunflower, that'd be good because, as Joe mentioned, we're exploring new herbicides, but we have a limited number of herbicides to choose from, and certainly our resistant weed number is growing, and complexity in managing weeds. So I think that's a number of reasons why the sunflower following corn is a fairly popular sequence. Showing you a little bit of data. This is from the Mandan Ag Research Service location in North Dakota, is showing the impact of the preceding crop on sunflower yield. And as you would suspect, sunflower following spring wheat optimized yield. I'm not including another crop, but field pea was another one where sunflower performed as well as a spring wheat. And then, as you suspect, if we had sunflower and sunflower, it's a poor decision. And I don't know if anybody actually does that. I sure hope not. My surprise here is on corn, but I know the work was done that's in this data was when there was very dry conditions. And so maybe the corn did use a lot of the available soil moisture that just wasn't available the following year for the sunflower. And then one other database, this is from Manitoba. It is a survey of commercial fields, fairly large fields over quite a period of time. And so notice the column that has the sunflower performance based on the previous crop. And note at the bottom of the chart shows grain corn being a very nice environment for sunflower in optimizing yield. And then, of course, the spring wheat and oats were a good environment. Barley, a little bit less. I'm not sure why that is. But, and then also notice soybean was a good seeding crop as well. So just enforce what you guys are doing out there. Keep it up. It's good to have a grass crop ahead of the sunflower to help keep our yield potential up there. More information from our survey. Part of the work is to identify those factors that are reducing our calculated yields. Disease, of course, was number one last year. Sam Markel, who'll be following me, or following Anita, will be talking about disease. But number two actually was plant spacing, and this was within rows. With the teams I worked with, it was very common to see irregular plant spacing within rows and even within a field. This is a look at the row spacing and predominantly across the states as well as in all of the states in Manitoba. Notice that 30-inch rows were very common. We know that solid seeding will perform well. There are some challenges with that, of course, but anyway, 30 inches was very common across the region based on our survey. And then I show this yield factor data again, and we have a category called other, at least based on my experience with the team members I worked with in the East Central and South Central North Dakota. We put plant populations in the other column. Really, in the future, I think we should have plant population as its own standalone factor, because so many times we see less than optimum plant populations, which certainly have a negative impact on the yield calculations. And this is a look at the average plant population and resultant yield, again, for across all states and Manitoba as well as looking at North Dakota and South Dakota. So what's interesting is if you look at North Dakota, is we had an average stand that wasn't too bad for oil seeds. We usually use the standard of about 20,000 established plants. We weren't very far under that, and the resultant yield certainly was good. We reached a ton yield. What I find interesting is looking at the South Dakota data. They had similar yield as in North Dakota, but look at the plant population. It was considerably less, about 3,000 plants on average less compared to North Dakota. So I don't know what South Dakota's secret is, but they're getting by with, at least in this database, with lower plant populations and still coming through with very nice yield. Keep in mind too that there's a small percentage of the plant population data that is with confections that, of course, would have lower plant populations. This is a chart from our NDSU Sunflower Production Guide, and it's just looking at seed spacing. So on the left-hand margin, I show the plants per acre, the range that we typically would expect to have established for confections, and then this range would be for the oil seeds, of course. And so a couple of interesting things in the table is that at 18 and 22 inches, given the parameters of the data in this chart, notice that at these two row spacings and then at the respective populations, that's where we have nearly equal distance spacing amongst plants, which seem to be what would be ideal for optimizing our yield potential. And then, of course, I showed you the row spacing data from our survey from last year, and predominantly we did have the 30-inch rows. And so with oil seeds, if we're targeting that 20,000 plants, that would mean the seed spacing at planting time should be in that 8 to 9 inch distance. And then for the typical targeted plant population for confections, notice very simply about a foot between seeds would be optimum, again, under 30-inch rows. And then the lower table, this came from the Manitoba Sunflower Production Guide. And what I think is interesting and may be useful for you is that they're showing the sunflower seed size and then the associated number of seeds per pound for both oil type sunflower as well as the confections. And so you can see the seed size, for example, on oils and the range in number of seeds per pound to help with your planting purposes for the upcoming planting season. All right, there's a lot of ways our sunflower plants can be defoliated. And if you look close, you see one very common pest out there that does defoliate our sunflower. And in our survey, fairly low percentage, but there were some fields where we had some problems with hail. So whatever the cause of the sunflower defoliation, we don't want that, of course. This is another table in our sunflower production guide that shows the resultant yield from based on the crop stage, the plant stage, as well as the amount of leaf area that's destroyed. And so I roughly drew in a little line here just to separate where we approach double-digit yield reduction. And so look what happened. When we get to the reproductive stages, in particular R3 stage, and R3 would be where the uppermost leaf on the stem is significantly separated from the base of the head. So at that stage, that was the most critical, where if we only had 25% foliage destruction, we already hit that double-digit yield mark. And so really the bottom line here is that from R2 stage all the way up to R7 would be when we look at the back of the head and we start to see some loss of green color. During that period is when we got to do our best to minimize stress. Of course, Mother Nature has a say in this, but things we can manage, let's take care of them during this time to keep our yield potential up there. And then really my final point I want to talk about is oil premiums. They're certainly a nice bonus for us, especially with sunflower prices being down this year. We can do some things to bump up our oil percentage on oil sunflower or con oils for that matter. That certainly can help our bottom line. And so there are some things that we can do. And to me, the top of the list would be just hybrid selection. Hybrid selection is so important for yield and other things as well. So do your homework on hybrid selection. And Anita will talk about our publication to help you with those decisions. Some other things, though, that can have an impact on seed oil percentage would be planting date. And planting early may help us. Ultimately, our goal is to have seed field taking place during warm temperatures, 80 degrees or higher. So planting early maybe gives us some more opportunity to have warmer temperatures versus the late planting and maybe having the seed field taking place in September when we'd expect our temperatures to be less. Plant nutrition, I really should remove the question mark. Dave talked about this a little bit. South Dakota state data as well as NDSU data indicates that as we increase N rates, especially if they're beyond what are needed for optimizing yield, that has a detriment in very likely reducing our seed oil percentage. And then what's interesting is there's some geographic impact within North Dakota on performance of oil content in sunflower. And what's interesting is I'm showing the average oil content of our oil hybrid performance tests at these 4 locations. And Anita, look at how Langdon is doing. You've probably noticed this, but Langdon is performing very well on high oil content as compared to the other locations that have listed, the averages of those. We need to have more sunflowers up in your area, Anita, and get that oil up there. Well, I'm about done, but I just listed a summary of the points that I quickly brought out. Yeah, using reduced till system, a lot of people are doing that, and that's good. We can maintain yield, plus all the other benefits of reduced tillage, such as reducing soil erosion, etc. In general, sunflowers do not have a very good tolerance to saline soils, especially at establishment time. We talked about crop sequences. I hope I stress the importance of doing all you can to have a uniform seed placement and ultimately plant spacing within rows, as well as optimizing plant populations. And certainly minimize stress during those important reproductive stages. And then do your homework on hybrid selection, including keep an eye on oil percentage, because that certainly can provide some premiums for a person. And that's what I have to share with you on agronomic overview.